Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're back to reviewing one of my favorite things, a pen I recently got from China. This is a pen I wouldn't have paid any attention to, but one of my viewers recommended I look at it, and so I found an eBay auction. Here's that auction. The pen comes in a number of different designs and styles. Also sold by Bobby. And this version comes in this translucent plastic case, which looks kind of nice. A little bit bigger than it needs to be from my perspective. You know, it's branded. You know, no other identification except, you know, it's recyclable. Number 5, polypropylene. Nice material. Snaps off and we see the pen. So I'm just a fan of this blue color, kind of a turquoise color. The pen feels good in the hand, it looks good. The one I have has these grooves in the cap, which they call the screw design. They also do stripes and lattice and a couple other things. You may notice this pen is very familiar to those of you that may have gotten a pen in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or even a little bit later. There's a Parker 45. And it is. It's a pretty identical model to a Parker 45. They've removed the feather design from the arrow clip there, but it's still basically that same design. So I know some of you get excited about, have emotional reactions to a Chinese pen that looks kind of identical to a pen that was made popular by an American manufacturer. But this is in no way meant to knock that pen off. That pen's been out of production for well over 10 years. As you can see, it's branded Moonman, and that's where you would find the Parker and the 45, and we'll compare these to Parker 45s later on in the video. But Parker took the tooling back in the late 70s to China to make 45s there. They hope to be able to supply the Asian market with that and also have another source of supply and possibly save production costs. Unfortunately, after many trial runs and tooling and everything else, the Parker just canceled the arrangement. And then Parker moved to UK and they left their Janesville office from a manufacturing viewpoint. So the executive supporting it left the company, so they were left with the tooling and they made pens. And this is the latest version of that pen. Pull off cap, you know, your classic Parker section, classic semi-hooded nib. It's not marked as the Parkers are usually marked, but I'm going to call that a fine. They call it a 0.5 millimeter in the auction, but I consider that a fine, and they do too. It posts very nice and very securely. I mean, this pen is just a classic design. You can hold it anywhere you want. I think this section is a good size. So we're going to explore the world of Parker 45s a little bit and also take a look at this pen and see how it writes compared to the vintage. I thought we would compare visually the Moonman 80 to some Parker 45s that I have in my collection. I went on a buying binge for a while, and I still plan on doing a Parker 45 retrospective. But as you can see, the biggest difference is this little silver finial at the bottom of the barrel and no detail in the clip, but it is that arrow shape. The rest of the pen is very similar. And I'll do a breakdown and show how the different parts work together, but I just thought I'd show you this. And also, this was the converter that was used, the aerometric converter. The 45 was introduced in 1960. It was sold until 2006, so that's a pretty good run of 46 years. And Parker sold 75 million. I'll put a link to Richard Binder's nice write-up on the Parker 45. So what got me into collecting these was as I got one at a pen show a number of years ago with an oblique broad nib, which was absolutely phenomenal and beautiful. So I went on a quest to find different style nibs. I got a broad, I got some other kind of obliques, some mediums. So that's one thing, that the Moonman 80 right now just has one nib, and you can put the Parker 45 nibs in there, as I'll show you later on. Here we have the disassembled Moonman and a disassembled Parker 45. I'm using the black one, so I'm not going to get parts confused, and you'll see why in a minute. That is something that could easily happen. So let's start with the important bits, the nib. These nibs are interchangeable. The only real main difference is the back of the Parker nib is labeled with the size of the nib, and the Moonman is not. In this case, the Parker one is an F for fine. It's a gold-plated nib. I don't think it's gold. You can take these apart. This collar slips off and the nib comes out, but I'm not in the mood to do that. So we can take this Parker 45 nib and the section from the Moonman, and they screw right together, and it looks like they were made to fit together. You can take the barrel from the vintage Parker 45 and screw it onto the section of the Moonman, and you can take the cap and it fits as though it was made to go on there. So we've just made a real Frankenpen, or a marriage of two cultures, and producing a pen. So one of the things that I hope we all keep in mind is that one of the reasons this is possible is that Parker tried to make 45s in China in the late 70s. They worked with Shanghai Pen Company. They produced a bunch of pens. They tried to work out an economic agreement on manufacturing, hopefully for distribution in the Asian market, but for some reason unexpectedly canceled it. And that's all referenced in Frank Underwater's description, which I think is very good reading for those that are interested in history for an era that I didn't know anything about before this, and now look at things a little bit differently. So that's one of the things that I think is of interest. Like I say, I enjoy all aspects of pens. I enjoy playing around with them, experiencing them. Looks like that converter would work, which is what I would have expected. Yep, fits right in there. So all these parts are interchangeable. So one of the things that we can take away from this exercise is buy a Moonman 80 for less than 15 bucks. And if you need some parts to bring your Parker 45 up to snuff, then you got parts, and they're good parts. They're well made. They're going to fit right in. This little metal piece at the end is not necessarily my favorite, but as we saw from some of the other Parkers, that is a design that they did do. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little insight into these parts and how they're completely interchangeable. Take a bit closer look at these sections. As you can see, there's an insert there, which is probably the equivalent of the feed, whereas the nib assembly is more like the ink channel. We flip these around. We'll see how that works on the other side, and that provides the nipple for the converter and or cartridge to fit into play. Yeah, the Parker one is all black in there, so it's kind of hard to, there we go, to show you that. But this one is that kind of like interesting white silicone. I'm assuming has some nice properties to it and works well, but we'll find out when we do the writing. So what ink to put in it? I decided to go with Robert Oster ink, and we have $10 teal. So we'll see how that works in this fine nib. So one thing that the Parker 45s are known for is they're very easy to write width. You can hold it any place. It posts very deeply and very securely. It's about as good a posting pen as you're going to find anywhere. It fits in the hand, both posted and unposted, so you don't need to post for length, but if you want a place to put the cap and keep it someplace, and if you want to put the pen down and it doesn't roll away, then putting a cap on it serves a purpose. It was a little dry there because I left it uncapped for a while, and it's been a while since I wrote with it, so I'm not concerned about that. It does not have a history of hard start, so that I'm not concerned about. This nib is, sorry about that. This nib is smooth and fairly wet. You know, it's easy to lay down a nice patch of ink. And I'm really a fan of this $10 teal. So overall, I like the way it writes. And I would call this an extra fine nib. So let's compare it to a vintage 45. I inked up this red one. Notice it has a gold clip on it, so that's one of the features that, you know, they changed in different models. You know, gold finial at the top there. Pop off the cap. Still a stainless steel ring here, but the nib is gold plated. And the 45s usually put the nib size in the back of the feed here, and it's not labeled, so when they're not labeled, theoretically they're an extra fine. And this ink is Lamy turquoise. I really wanted to put in $10 teal, but I got confused and put in this instead, but I think it'll work out okay. I think you can hear the difference right away. This is definitely a sharper, extra fine. You get more feedback. I haven't done anything to tune this nib or to smooth this nib, so I think you could do that. It writes easily. You know, same ergonomics as the Moonman 80. But if I had to choose between these nibs, I would take the Moonman 80 nib. It's easier to lay down a thick patch of ink with that nib. It is a wetter nib. The Lamy turquoise is probably a little bit drier ink, but not much than Robert Oster. And you actually get some shading with that extra fine nib, which is indicative of the flow that you're getting out of it. So I'm impressed with how the pen writes, and that's really my criteria. I think they did a good job with the design. I think the materials and fit and finish are very good. There seems to be a slight gap there between the cap and the barrel, so this ring looks to be a little bit large, or the cap is a little bit small. You know, it's nice that it's identified as Moonman. That's the only place on the pen that it is, but that's where Parker also put their labeling on the 45. Yeah, there's your 45. Not all of them are labeled 45, and there's your Parker. So that's very similar, but you know, that little gap, as you can see, it's even a little bit on that red pen, but not quite as severe. And if we compare it to other pens, there the gap is pretty significant. So it's probably a function of the pen, and maybe because these are new, that cap fits tighter, and maybe over time it'll loosen up and fit closer, but time will tell, not in the course of this video. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little look at a Chinese pen, which is made with the same tools that the Parker 45 was made with, probably, or some generational thereafter. So we've reached the end. And I do like the way this writes. I have to admit that that is certainly one of its positive traits. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. May you have many great writing experiences. Explore this wonderful world of pens, nibs, inks, and paper that we have the pleasure to participate in. You have a wonderful day. Bye.